So we're in Genesis 31, the first 16 verses, and we've seen trouble brewing because Laban's sons are upset. They see all Jacob's wealth as a threat to their own inheritance. They're grumbling that Jacob's taken away what was rightfully theirs. Laban himself is growing hostile toward Jacob because he saw how God was blessing his son-in-law despite all he could do to prevent it. And as we will learn, he was doing a lot to try to put roadblocks in the way. Now, this may have just been the natural result of ungodly people becoming envious at the prosperity of somebody else. But it may also be that God himself was kind of stirring up the nest, so to speak, ruffling their feathers to make Jacob see it was time for him to leave Paddan Aram and return home. Remember back when his dad, when Abraham was arranging a bride, and he told the servant, "Don't you take my son back." Because Abraham knew, once you're back, it's so easy. Things come up. Life happens. Well, here Jacob now has been gone for 20 years.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that long.
Yeah, but a lot's gone on.
It's like a couple weeks, stuff.
Yeah, yeah, a lot can happen in 2 weeks. Time flies. Anyway, at this rate, Jacob has had enough. He's ready to pick up and leave.
Yeah.
So when God tells him to go back, so he calls them, his wives out privately, and he rehearses this whole story, which they're probably pretty well aware of anyway. But they're in total agreement that their family should leave. And they themselves have been wronged by their father. Seems that he spent all their dowry money, and he hasn't treated them like daughters, but like slaves or cattle to be sold for his own gain. So that brings us to 17 to 42. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels, and he drove away all his livestock, all his property that he gained, the livestock in his possession that he acquired in Paddan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had, and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. When it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days, and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." And Laban overtook Jacob. Laban wasn't bringing his flocks with him. He could move pretty fast. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you've tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me, and didn't tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And why didn't you permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you've done foolishly. It's in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, good or bad.'" Don't you like his interpretation of saying nothing? "And now you've gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought you'd take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, you point out what I have that's yours and take it." Now Jacob didn't know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the 2 female servants, but he didn't find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but didn't find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." So he searched, but didn't find the household gods. And then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What's my offense? And what's my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods, and what have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I haven't eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I didn't bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Therefore, there I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flock, and you've changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night." So God has told Jacob to go home, so Jacob seats his wives and his 12 children on camels and runs off with them, along with all the flocks, herds, and servants that he's acquired in the past 20 years. He gains a 3-day head start before word gets back to Laban about their flight. And then, not only does Laban learn that his son-in-law has fled with his entire family, but he also discovers that somebody has stolen his household gods. Now, this is a fighting matter, maybe even a killing matter. So he gathers a small army of kinsmen and sets off in hot pursuit, determined to get his stuff back. It takes him a week to catch up, and by then Jacob is very close to the northern border of Canaan. But then God intervenes and warns Laban to say nothing to Jacob, let alone fight with him or kill him. Now Laban knows better than to cross the God of Abraham and Isaac. He'd heard an awful lot about this God when his sister Rebekah left home to marry Abraham's son. But it's almost amusing to read what his idea of saying nothing is. He blurts out plenty, trying his best to sound like an aggrieved father, complaining because Jacob has tricked him. Imagine that. Yet here's yet another example of out of the abundance of the mouth the heart speaks, because at the end of his little tirade, he blurts out the real reason he's so angry. Why'd you steal my gods? Jacob knows nothing about what Rachel's done, so he confidently tells Laban to take some of his kinsmen as witnesses and search through all the belongings of his entire family. And he even pronounces a death sentence on whoever's found with it. Of course, he doesn't think anybody has stolen them, so he says this in untroubled ignorance. Laban began his search with Jacob's tent, and then he methodically moved on from there to Leah's tent, and the tent of the 2 female servant wives. I guess they didn't rate a tent apiece, but anyway, had to share one. And lastly, Rachel's tent. Rachel must have been sweating it. But she is her father's daughter, and she has a little trick of her own to play. She claims to be having her period, which renders her unclean in the culture of that time. And so Laban doesn't even try to search the camel saddle on which she's sitting. It would be considered unclean as well. And it would be unthinkable for him to think that she had hidden something of that value while she's having her period. So he doesn't even tumble at all. He felt all about the tent, probably pawing wildly, because this is the last tent, and through every conceivable hiding place, and growing more and more agitated as his prized idols failed to materialize, until he finally has to concede defeat. And now Jacob is angry. Well, you can imagine. He's been watching Laban paw through all of their stuff, and all these feelings from the past 20 years come pouring out. I thought that Warren Wiersbe summed it up pretty well in his commentary. He said, watching his devious father-in-law arrogantly search through all the family's personal possessions made Jacob angry, and rightly so. And feelings were now released from his heart that had been buried there for 20 years. He spoke openly of Laban's underhanded practices, how he had deceived Jacob, given him the hardest work, and changed his wages many times. God had blessed Laban because of Jacob, but Laban had never thanked either the Lord or Jacob. Nor had he repaid Jacob for the animals that Jacob had to replace at his own expense. But the most important thing in Jacob's speech was the way he gave honor to the Lord. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. So, remember Jacob had this little thing where he peeled the bark and on these sticks and then put them out. But he's come to realize those sticks have nothing to do with it. It's been God. And he gives full credit to the Lord for the wealth he's gained, both in what he had said to Rachel and Leah just before they all fled, and now again to Laban. But one thing that caught my attention this time as I was reading it was how he referred to God as the fear of Isaac. I don't remember seeing that expression anywhere else. And what does that mean, the fear of Isaac? I looked up the word fear in my concordance, and I discovered there's actually 2 or 3 different Hebrew words that can be translated fear. It's sort of like in English, you can say afraid or terrified or, shocked. There's slightly different shades of meaning. So in the same way, the Hebrew words have slightly different connotations. The Hebrew word that's used here, the fear of Isaac, literally means a sudden alarm, referring to the actual object that causes the feeling of terror. In this case, God himself. It would be like you're camping up north, you unzip your tent, boom, and you come face to face with a bear. Sudden alarm and fear,
Yeah.
So, and the English translators are correct in capitalizing fear in this phrase because Jacob is using the word here as a name for God. But what prompted Jacob to use this particular word in referring to the God of his father? Well, 2 things came to my mind. 2 times when I thought Jacob would have been very afraid, or it's not Jacob, Isaac would have been very afraid. One was how Isaac had been willing to submit himself to death on an altar when God had told his father Abraham to sacrifice him. Remember when we studied that, he didn't protest. He didn't try to get off. He didn't try to fight his dad. But he must have been very frightened, But he was even more afraid to resist the will of God. And then the second thing was remembering how it said that Isaac trembled violently when he realized, I've blessed Jacob but not Esau. And it says he trembled violently. And I don't think he was trembling in anger. He was afraid. And why would that be? I think that in that instant, he realized just how close he had come again to death. That is, God's judgment falling on him because he had been so determined to bless his favorite son instead of the one that God had made clear was to be blessed. So anyway, the other 2 Hebrew words that can be translated as fear have more the connotation of deep reverence. You find these words used in phrases such as, I thought surely there's no fear of God, no reverence for God in this place. That's what Abraham said to Pharaoh when Pharaoh caught him out in his lie. And then these other words are also used in this phrase, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I think Isaac had a deep reverence for God, and he knew that God isn't to be trifled with. And so it's terrifying indeed to find yourself actively opposing him. He'd been telling himself, it's all right, it's no big deal. And God's got his hand in this, and I've been doing the wrong thing. To put it another way, if you have no fear, no deep reverence of God, you may find yourself suddenly facing your greatest fear, God himself. Then what you going to do? So anyway, I just thought that was interesting that Jacob caught that and used that as a name for God. So this brings us to the last few verses of this chapter, starting in 43. So in this back and forth, Laban answers and said to Jacob, The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." And they took stones and made a heap, probably all around that pillar. So it's this great big pile of stones. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galid. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." And therefore he named it Galid. And Mizpah, for he, meaning Jacob, said, "The Lord watch between you and me when we're out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." And then Laban said to Jacob, "See this heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me? This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I won't pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, and Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread, spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them, and then he departed and returned home. Okay, well, this particular part of the narrative doesn't have one of those little headers over it, but some people have mistakenly called it the Mizpah benediction. Maybe you've heard that. But that's really a misnomer. It's not really a benediction at all, as we're going to see. Laban suggests that he and Jacob make a covenant of peace between them, which sounds like a positive thing. Something was seen before in both Abraham and Isaac's lives when they made treaties of peace with the Abimelech ruling Palestine in their respective eras. So Jacob agrees to Laban's proposal, and he has his men gather up stones and pile them in a large heap as a permanent monument to their agreement. Laban names it Jegar Sahadutha, Jacob calls it Galid. Both names mean exactly the same thing, a heap of witness. They're just different languages because Laban spoke Aramaic, Jacob spoke Hebrew. So just two different language words, but they both mean heap of witness. But then Jacob adds the name Mizpah, as he stated the purpose for the commemorative pile of rocks. The Lord watched between you and me when we're out of one another's sight. Now that sounds very warm and fuzzy. Lord watch over you, like asking God to watch over and protect our loved ones when we are separated. But Mizpah is a military term that means a watchtower or a military observatory. Who are people in a military watchtower watching out for? Enemies, not relatives. So what these two men are actually saying is, may God keep an eye on you to make sure you don't ever go past this marker to harm me or my family. They didn't trust each other an inch. Even though they went through the motions of a peace treaty, they eat a meal together before Laban goes home. So the Mizpah benediction is in reality the Mizpah warning. You stay on your side, I'll stay on mine. And God is watching to get you. So, that brings us to chapter 22.
32.
Oh, yeah, 32. So, first couple of verses, Jacob went on his way. The angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. All right, so one hostile relative has been dealt with. Laban's, gone back home. So Jacob can continue on his journey without worrying about Laban attacking him. But he has the potential of an even more hostile relative waiting for him on the other end. Remember his brother Esau wanted to kill him when they parted ways 20 years earlier. But once again, God gives him encouragement in a very unique way. As Moses puts it, the angels of God met him. Jacob had seen these same angels at Bethel when he first set out for Haran to escape Esau and get a wife, and he recognized them instantly from that previous encounter. Thought it was interesting that the expression, the angels of God, occurs only here and back in chapter 28 in the entire New Testament. We'll see angels doing things, but that phrase, the angels of God, is only used here and there. Both times it was in relation to Jacob on his journey. According to the Bible Knowledge Commentary, there are also some other parallels between these two angel sightings if you research the Hebrew expressions used to describe Jacob's journey and the response to what he sees. God is going to great lengths to assure Jacob and any future readers of this account, like us, that he's watching over Jacob and will fulfill his promise to bring him safely back home. Jacob gives the place where this encounter took place a special name, just as he has done at Bethel 20 years earlier. He calls it Mahanaim, which sounds similar to two camps in Hebrew, probably referring to the camp of God's angels and his own camp of family members and servants. There may be another reason he would call it two camps, as we're going to see in the next part of the narrative. Okay, so that brings us to verses 3 to 23. So, Jacob sends messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I might find favor in your sight." So the messengers, returned to Jacob saying, "We came to your brother Esau and he's coming to meet you. And there are 400 men with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two camps, thinking, well, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, then the other camp, the one that's left, will escape. And Jacob said, "O God, my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred that I may do you good. I'm not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I've become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I'll surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. And these he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself. And he said to his servants, "Now pass on ahead of me, and put a space between drove and drove." And he instructed the first one, "When Esau my brother meets you and asks you, to whom do you belong, where you're going, whose are these ahead of you, then you'll say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They're a present sent to my lord Esau. And moreover, he's behind us." He likewise instructed the second and the third and all who followed the droves. "You'll say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us." For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterward I shall see his face. Maybe he'll accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. We'll stop there briefly. Well, if you look back at that little map that I gave you, the one Jacob's journey to Haran and back, we'll see where he is on his way home. And kind of made an enlargement of the pertinent part of the thing. So He crossed the Euphrates to get away from Laban, and he's come all the way down. And here's this, where they made the Mizpah thing. This is where Laban would have caught up with him. And then Laban goes back home, Jacob goes on. And here's the two camps where the angels are. So he's getting pretty close, because just right over here across the way is Canaan. So he's pretty close to where he's headed. Okay, but at this point, he's still east of the Jordan River. That's the river that connects the Dead Sea with the Sea of Galilee. And he's getting ready to meet Esau. Now, God has been preparing him for the reunion by sending angels to encourage him. Don't be afraid, So Jacob sends his own messengers to Esau to let him know he's coming. There's a distinct parallel between these two events. The Hebrew word does not have separate words for angel and messenger. The very same word, malach, is used for both, and the only way we can tell whether you mean angels or people is the context of the sentence. So when it says the angels of God, well, the messengers of God, if you will, obviously those are angels. But Jacob is sending his own malachs, his own messengers, and they're people, his shepherds and so on. But anyway, God sent his messengers, the angels, to give Jacob peace of mind. And now Jacob wants to let his brother know that he's coming in peace. Notice how humble he is in the way he words his message. He keeps calling him my Lord, and I'm your servant. And he's humbly asking to find favor in your sight. So Jacob is hoping for reconciliation, but he receives alarming news. It looks like Esau's preparing for war, not peace. He's coming to meet you with 400 men. Remember when Abram went out to rescue his nephew, taking 318 men with him, and they defeated 5 kings? Now Esau's on his way with an even larger army of men than that. So as a first step of precaution, Jacob divides his people and his herds into 2 groups or camps, hoping that at least one is going to survive this encounter with Esau. And then Jacob prays, pouring out his heart humbly, thanking God for all he's done for him up to this point, pleading for protection from his brother for both himself and his family. And he also does what any of us should do in prayer. He quotes specific promises of God that apply directly to his situation. God, remember you said. And yet, despite that, Jacob's still afraid. He's growing, he's getting to know more. He still has a ways to go. He's not yet fully trusting God to do what he said he would do. He said, I'm going to bring you safely home. So that means you're not going to die. And all your descendants aren't going to die, But anyway, Jacob makes one more step of preparation that he hopes will appease his brother. He sends a series of gifts, separating each little installment with a space. The gifts are herds of valuable animals, and probably the distance between the herds was intended to serve 2 purposes. One, it increases the impact. What's this? Oh, this is a present for you. And he goes on, oh, well, what's this? Well, this is a present for you. Another one? Oh, what's this? Oh, this is a present for you. So he's adding punch to the present, if you will. But also it would slow Esau down as he pauses to inspect each one of these separate little herds. So Jacob is hoping against hope that Esau will come to accept him, not knowing that God has already answered that prayer. In his fear, he does one more thing before the fateful meeting occurs. He sends his entire family and his remaining animals across the Jabbok River, which lies between him and Esau, while he himself remains on the far side. Now, why would he do that? It almost seems like he's putting his family at risk while he's staying back. But let's not be too harsh in our judgment. People who are acting out of fear usually don't make good choices. And he didn't have all the benefits we do. He doesn't have any scripture to rely on. The Bible hasn't been written yet. Moses is writing it at this time, but Jacob's long dead. So he doesn't have any scripture. He doesn't know the rest of the story about the coming Redeemer, Jesus Christ. And he's just spent the last 20 years of his life in a pagan home, a home that had these idols in it. He's had little or no encouragement in his faith, and he doesn't have the benefit that we do of a church family, you know. So he's begun to know the Lord, but he still has a lot to learn. So God's going to give him another faith lesson, only this time he isn't going to do it through angel messengers. He's coming personally to get Jacob's attention. So that brings us to Jacob wrestles with God. The same night, Jacob arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 children, crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He sent them across the stream and everything else he had, and he's left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. And when the man saw that he didn't prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob says, "I won't let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." And then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. Well, this was a very unusual faith lesson. And I have to be honest, every time I've come to this part of Jacob's story and read about this wrestling match, I shake my head and think, what on earth is going on here? I've consulted a few commentaries, but I still haven't found an explanation for the purpose of this wrestling match that really makes complete sense to me. But as I've thought about it this time through, a few little glimmers of ideas have come, so I'm going to pass those on that may help. Okay, so one thing, Jacob was left alone. All right, sometimes when we're really deeply troubled, we just want to be alone as we wrestle with some issue that's facing us. It just seems absolutely overwhelming. You know, there are times when being with other people takes energy that we don't think we have, or at least we don't want to expend it. So Jacob wants to be alone as he's trying to figure out, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And a man wrestled with him. God didn't leave him alone. God knew if he stays alone, that's all he's going to do. He's not going to sleep. He's just going to worry, you know, and try to come up with some solution. So God came and made Jacob do something that would effectively take his mind off his fear of Esau and force him to concentrate on something else. It's almost as if God was taunting Jacob just in order to goad him into activity. You want to wrestle with something big? Try me on for size. Doing something physical when you're frozen with fear does help. You know, he's not thinking about Esau at this moment. And then comes when the man saw that he didn't prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Oh, wait a minute. There's 2 things here that make me think, this doesn't seem right. And the first is a statement that the man, who we'll see is really not man, but God himself appearing as a man, didn't prevail against Jacob. You mean to tell me that the almighty creator of the universe couldn't win a wrestling match against a mere human? No way. And that's absolutely right. There is no way. I think what was actually happening here was that Jacob just wouldn't give up. He's not going to say uncle. He's just going to keep going and keep going and keep going. And it's time for the next phase of this faith lesson, so God puts an end to the wrestling match by putting Jacob's hip out of joint. And then he wait. If this was a football game, all those red flags would be thrown out. Foul, that's like a face mask, you know. You put the guy's hip out of joint so you can win? That doesn't seem right. Apparently, Jacob limped for the rest of his life, but you know what? He was also forced to rely on the Lord in a way he probably never would have if he'd just been left alone. This is a guy that all his life has relied on himself and his wits and his own abilities, and God is saying, okay, I'm going to weaken you a little bit. I want you to rely on me. I want this to become the new normal in your life. So it's not something that's going to harm him in the sense that it kills him or endangers him, but it's a constant reminder God promised and God's going to do what he said he's going to do. So then God says, okay, well, let me go. The day is broken. But Jacob says, I won't let you go unless you bless me. At some point during this wrestling match, Jacob has realized who his opponent is, and he's desperate for that blessing. His hip is out of joint, so he can't wrestle anymore, but he is still holding on to the man for dear life. And you know what? That's the whole point of this encounter. It was to bless Jacob, and God proceeds to do so. He begins, as he so often does, with a question that's designed to get Jacob thinking. What's your name? And Jacob says, Jacob. But he was surely thinking of what his name meant, the deceiver. I'm the one who grasps the heel of other people in order to trip them up. That's who I am. And God blesses Jacob by giving him a new identity to live up to. Your name's no longer going to be called Jacob. You're no longer going to be the deceiver. You're Israel. For you have striven with God and with men, and you have prevailed. This new name is a combination of the word El, which means Almighty God, and a Hebrew verb meaning to prevail or rule. Put them together and you get to prevail or rule as God. Whoa! Jacob's going to have that kind of power because God's behind him. So just think of how meaningful that would have been for Jacob at that moment. He doesn't have to fear facing his brother anymore because he, Israel, will prevail. Now this wrestling match kind of makes sense. It was an object lesson that would serve as a lifelong reminder that God is going to see that he ultimately prevails, meaning he, Jacob, ultimately prevails. And think of the added meaning for us. Someday, we're going to see Jacob's chief descendant, Jesus Christ, literally ruling as God on earth. He will literally be Israel. So then Jacob asks him, please tell me your name. But he says, why is it you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of that place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. And here's where we find out for sure that Jacob has not been wrestling an angel or some human man, but God himself. Peniel, El meaning God. Okay, so then the sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, which is just a different way of spelling Peniel, limping because of his hip. And therefore to this day, meaning to Moses' day, the people of Israel don't eat the sinew of the thigh on the hip socket. I highlighted that phrase to call attention to the fact that Moses meant his day when he was writing, but I was a little curious. I wonder if that's still true. And according to the Bible Knowledge Commentary, they say this taboo became a custom in Israel, but it wasn't part of the Mosaic law. But still, Orthodox Jews still refuse to eat the tendon from the hind quarter of animals. That's kind of interesting. That custom started 3,600 years ago or so, and still carrying on. Okay. That's it. So that brings us to the end of that. So, for next week, we're going to read, is it 3 chapters? Well, you got your little, 33, 34, and 35. And we'll get to see how the actual meeting between the two brothers went down and what happened there.
Right ahead.
Uh-huh. That's